a small secret that can change everything. Let me tell you something that might sound a little strange at first. Have you ever thought that just keeping a small item in your pocket could change your life forever? I know, it sounds too simple, almost unbelievable. But in all my years of learning and observing life, I've realized that the smallest things, when done with the right intention, often create the biggest changes. Buddhist teachings say that the mind is everything. What you think, you become. And sometimes, it's not about making big, drastic changes, but about shifting the way you see the world, one small act at a time. Imagine waking up each morning, feeling a quiet sense of peace, knowing that you are protected from negativity, open to new opportunities, and in harmony with life's abundance. That feeling, that deep, unshakable calm, is something we all seek. Life, however, has a way of pulling us in different directions. Some days, the weight of stress, financial worries, or difficult people can leave us feeling drained. Other times, it feels like no matter how much effort we put in, things just don't seem to work out. Maybe you've felt this way too, like you're carrying something heavy that you can't quite put down. But here's the secret. You don't have to fight against life so hard. You don't have to push and struggle every step of the way. Sometimes, the key to transformation is much simpler than we think. In Buddhist philosophy, small actions, done with mindfulness, can shift your energy and change the way you experience the world. I want to share something with you. For centuries, people have used tiny, everyday objects as reminders of their intentions. Not because the objects themselves are magical, but because they help us focus our minds and direct our energy in the right way. Something as simple as carrying a small item with purpose can serve as a silent but powerful guide, keeping us on the path of peace, prosperity, and protection. Think about it. Have you ever held on to something for comfort? A lucky coin, a piece of jewelry from a loved one, even a note tucked into your wallet? That object wasn't just a thing, it carried meaning. It reminded you of something important, gave you strength, made you feel safe. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. There are certain objects that, when carried with the right intention, can bring a profound sense of balance to your life. Some help protect your peace, shielding you from negativity. Others help you attract abundance, opening doors to new opportunities. And some serve as gentle reminders to trust in the flow of life. Even when things seem uncertain, you might not believe it yet, but I promise. Once you try this, you'll start to notice a shift, a little more ease, a little more clarity, and perhaps the feeling that life is gently working in your favor. It's a small practice, but in time, you may look back and realize that it was one of the most powerful things you ever did. So let's begin. Let's start with something simple, something ancient, something that just might surprise you, the hidden power of cloves, inviting prosperity into your life. Let me tell you a little story. There was a man I once knew. Let's call him Daniel. He was one of those people who always seemed to be running to make more money, running to fix one problem after another, running to get ahead in life. No matter how hard he worked, he always felt like he was just barely keeping up. Every time he thought he was finally in a good place, something would come along. A broken car, a medical bill, a slow month at work, and suddenly he was back, where he started. One day, after a particularly frustrating week, he sat across from an old friend at a small cafe. The friend listened patiently as Daniel vented about his endless cycle of struggle. And then, without a word, the friend reached into his pocket, pulled out a handful of tiny, dried cloves and placed them on the table between them. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" His friend smiled. "Cloves. A small thing, but with great power. Carry them with you, and they'll help bring prosperity into your life." Daniel laughed. "You can't be serious. You think a few dried spices are going to fix my financial problems?" His friend just shrugged. "It's not the cloves themselves. It's what they remind you to do. Try it, and you'll understand." Daniel didn't believe a word of it, but something about the moment stayed with him. Maybe it was the way his friend spoke, or maybe it was because he was so tired of feeling stuck. Either way, he decided he had nothing to lose. That night, he found some cloves in his kitchen, took a deep breath, and slipped them into his pocket. He didn't expect anything to change. But slowly, something did. At first, it was just small things. He found a $20 bill in an old jacket. A client who had been delaying payment suddenly settled his account. A job opportunity popped up that he never would have considered before. But more than that, something shifted in the way Daniel saw the world. Every time he reached into his pocket and felt the cloves, they reminded him to pause. Instead of dwelling on what he lacked, he started focusing on what was coming. Instead of worrying about money, he started expecting it to flow into his life. And somehow, in ways he couldn't quite explain, it did. Cloves have been used for centuries as a symbol of prosperity, not because they have magical properties, but because they help us shift our mindset. In Buddhist teachings, wealth isn't just about money, it's about flow. Money, energy, and opportunities move like water. If you're constantly gripping onto fear and scarcity, you're blocking that flow. But if you open yourself to the idea that abundance is already on its way, you start noticing doors you never saw before. There's an old story about a man named Sudatta, though many know him as Anathapindika, the feeder of the poor. He was one of the wealthiest merchants of his time, but what made him truly rich wasn't his gold or land, it was his generosity. Sudatta wanted to build a monastery for the Buddha, a place where people could come and learn the path to peace. But when he found the perfect land, the owner demanded an impossible price. Instead of panicking, Sudatta did something remarkable. He took bags of gold and spread them across the ground, covering the land piece by piece. His faith in his mission was so strong that even the skeptical landowner was moved. The price was lowered, the land was his, and the monastery was built. That story always stuck with me, not because of the gold, but because of the lesson behind it. True wealth isn't about hoarding what you have. It's about trusting that more will come. When you carry that belief in your heart, life has a way of responding. Daniel didn't know about Sudatta's story when he first put those cloves in his pocket. But over time, he started to understand. He began to act differently. Instead of clutching onto every dollar in fear, he started giving freely, buying coffee for a friend, donating a little more when he could, tipping generously. He started saying yes to opportunities that scared him, instead of assuming they wouldn't work out. And little by little, things changed. Not overnight, not in the way he expected, but in ways that made him stop and think, maybe my friend was right after all. Years later, Daniel sat in that same cafe, across from the same friend. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried clove, rolling it between his fingers. "You know," he said, "I used to think this was silly." His friend just smiled. "And now?" Daniel exhaled, shaking his head with a small laugh. "Now I know. It was never about the cloves." The friend nodded. "It never is. I share this with you not because I believe cloves themselves will magically bring you wealth, but because sometimes we all need a small reminder to shift the way we see the world. Maybe you've been feeling stuck, like Daniel. Maybe money feels like a struggle, or opportunities seem just out of reach. If so, try this. Find some cloves, hold them in your hand, close your eyes, and take a deep breath. Imagine yourself at peace, your needs met, your future secure. Then slip them into your pocket. Carry them with you, and every time you feel them there, let them remind you, wealth is not something you chase. It's something you invite. And if you do this, if you let go of the fear and trust that prosperity is already making its way to you, don't be surprised when, one day, you sit back and realize that a simple spice tucked into your pocket was the start of something much bigger.